Howdy howdy, Sudevil here, and welcome to a testing video with the Longbeards with Great Weapons. Now this is a set of tests that were requested sometime after I had said in one of my other testing videos that, or I've probably said in a few videos, that Longbeards with Great Weapons are underperforming, particularly since the two nerfs. They got two quick nerfs in a row and right around the Tomb King's release, and they just haven't been performing. I've done some private testing, and I did some testing in my Lizardmen videos where they were super weak against Saurus warriors, and I finally decided to go through and do some thorough testing to see really where are the Longbeards with great weapons in the pantheon of infantry with great weapons. Where do they slot in? How poorly are they performing? And what would they need to bring them sort of up to snuff? So I've done fairly thorough testing, and I will justify my claims at the end by showing exactly where I think they need to be and why, or right in where they need to be. I also just wanted to mention the testing I did with miners. I did a lot of testing with miners, and they are very, very weak for their cost. You know, they cost 325, but they're really only worth about 200. Now, this is not miners with blasting charges. Miners with blasting charges are actually worth about 400. Because the blasting charges are quite powerful, that would say your blasting charges can be worth around 200 gold if you get them all off. I also wanted to test the Dwarf Warriors with great weapons because they are a unit I have not looked at. I wanted to see where they fit in, and I just also wanted to mention Hammers. I know Hammers are in good shape. They're a very good unit, and if you need an armor-piercing solution, they will do the trick, though they are quite expensive. So I'll go over the bit of testing that I did. Now, in the game sense, although it doesn't always work like this, there's kind of the rock, paper, scissors effect. You know, paper beats rock, rock beats scissors, scissors beats paper. The idea being that armor-piercing infantry is intended to be very good against non-armor-piercing infantry that is heavily armored. So the test that I wanted to show was up against just the regular Chaos Warriors. They have 100 armor. They only have 10 armor-piercing damage. And this is really going to be my anchor. Plus, they are also worth exactly 750. So in this engagement, you would expect the Longbeards with great weapons to win pretty handily, because this is precisely the type of unit they are intended to do well against. And we will go from there. So I'll just show you a quick test, and then we'll go to the spreadsheet, and I'll explain exactly how I take my data and evaluate that data if you haven't seen it before. I mean, I do this on all my videos, and we'll basically go through the numbers together, and this will be a long video. If I know this type of analysis isn't for everyone, so I'll try and put a summary at the very end of the video if you just want to skip an hour of talking and go to the meat and potatoes of it. To go ahead and do that. For those of you who love the analysis, you want to think your way through this with me, we'll get started now. So I've downloaded actually these little testing maps, the unit testing fields, and obviously I have use any general, just so I can do some very consistent testing that's repeatable, testing that you could do and confirm in that sense. So this is a matchup that the Longbeards with great weapons should win very handily. So we'll go in and look at the test, and then we'll go and look at the data. So I'll just try and run through this as quickly as I can, just so you can see the tests. And the tests, one test does not represent all the tests. That's why I do 7 of each, because that's a lot more representative of what the actual data will be. So, and I know the formations don't line up quite right, and you know, they get a little bit of a wraparound, but you know, we're not getting any attack from the side or attack from the rear or anything like this. But you can see the Chaos Warriors with great weapons are actually, they think they're winning this, and if we look, our Longbeards got 15 kills, they have 23 kills. So this doesn't bode really well for our Longbeards with great weapons. And you know, it's The Longbeards with great weapons really should be winning this pretty handily. For a unit that costs 750, that's definitely intended to deal with a unit that has heavy armor and no armor piercing. Like, this is exactly the unit the Longbeards with great weapons should be doing very well against in the rock, paper, scissors sort of mentality. And you can see it is extremely close, and they will lose this one. They do win some, so we'll end that battle. And you know, they both had 75 deployed. We had 62 losses, they had 49 losses. But we'll go to the spreadsheet because you do it 7 times. That way you get a much better idea of how that plays out. So I'll go to the first set of tests. I have the Longbeards with great weapons here, the Chaos Warriors. They both cost 750. Now, what I do is I take the starting time of the battle and the ending time of the battle, so I can take how long did the battle take. 269 seconds, an average of 255 seconds. How many wins did we get? In this case, we only won 42% of the time. We, in average, finished with 13% of our hit points. They finished with 20% of their hit points. We did 21 damage, 21 DPS, so basically 21 hit points per second. They did 22 to us. So this doesn't bode well for the start of our testing. We know the Longbeards with great weapons are not performing well, and this is exactly how I know this. So the approximate corrected value, they lost about an average of 49 gold in that, would say that if the Longbeards with great weapons were worth 700 gold, this would be a fair trade in terms of gold. But it really isn't. It still wouldn't be a fair trade because this is the type of unit that's meant to go up against the Chaos Warrior with great weapons. They should pull value, and a significant amount of value, no matter where they're at against the unit they're meant to pull value against. So this is actually the first bad sign that the Longbeards with great weapons are really not doing well in the slot that they're in right now with their stat points. So I also wanted to check out the Dwarf Warriors with great weapons. So I'll just go, we know if the Longbeards with great weapons are losing, the Dwarf Warriors with great weapons will as well, but they have the potential, because they are armor piercing, to pull value against a unit which is not armor piercing. So we'll just start that battle and I'll show how it goes, and then we'll go and look at the numbers. We know the Dwarf Warriors will probably lose every fight, but that doesn't really matter. We just want to see if they can pull value in that fight, because they are an armor piercing unit up against a heavily armored non-armor piercing unit. And you know, when you think about these things, like, the Daoi really do need to have robust infantry, really need to have good infantry all across the board. And I would say Chaos is another faction that needs to have good infantry all across the board, because Chaos doesn't have all the tools that other factions have, and they don't have a lot of ranged options and that sort of thing. And the dwarfs have no cavalry, no magic, and this means that the dwarf infantry needs to just be the best in slot at every level, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. So of course we lose that. We expected that, but we only got 16 kills to their 53, and we'll go and look at what the data is telling us. Are we pulling value with those Dwarf Warriors with great weapons? Okay, so we go down, and we expected to lose every battle. We lost 0, but we're actually losing value. We lost an average of 108 gold, and this would say that our Dwarf Warriors with great weapons were actually only worth 391 gold. Meaning if we had spent 391 gold, reran this test, the gold differential would be 0. Meaning it would be fair, but this again is telling me that the Dwarf Warriors with great weapons are underperforming. And we're going to go take a closer look at the Dwarf Warriors with great weapons later. Now, another unit, because I wanted to be thorough and look at same tier infantry, and one unit that a lot of people have say are really underperforming as well are Foot Squires. So I wanted to put the Foot Squires up against the Chaos Warriors with great weapon, or the Chaos Warriors, just the regular Chaos Warriors, because Foot Squires should actually perform again quite well. And this is something that people have said, the Foot Squires are not performing well. They are anti-infantry, they are a damage dealer, and they're armor piercing. So they have a bonus versus infantry of 9. They're worth 700. They should easily beat the Chaos Warriors. So let's go take a look at what happens. And again, I know this is not just Dao infantry, but I wanted to be thorough in my set of tests so I could understand the scope of the problem and see if it's just a problem with armor-piercing infantry in general, if it's just a problem with the Dao, if it's a problem with, or maybe it's the way that they want the game to perform right now. So I wanted to see how these foot squires with armor-piercing would do, and it looks like, you know, they're kind of doing okay. It seems pretty even, and now you can see these Chaos Warriors, regular Chaos Warriors, think they're winning. These guys think they're winning, but it definitely looks like the foot squires are losing now, and they're starting to pull away. So if I look at the health differential, you can see the Chaos Warriors are, you know, gaining health. They're about 800, so they're definitely winning that fight now. So we can say the foot squires are also underperforming according to this test, and I will do some more testing with the foot squires against the longbeards with great weapons later, but the foot squires get trounced. And this is, again, the foot squires should do well exactly against this type of unit. This is the scissors to the Chaos Warriors paper. And obviously they are certainly not doing well. So we'll go and take a look at what the data is telling us. And they actually performed even worse than the longbeards with great weapons, losing 68 gold, and their value is about 632. Interestingly though, the foot squires do 30.5 damage per second compared to the longbeards 21.2, but that's mostly because there's more charge bonus involved, and they only lasted for 165 seconds, where the longbeards with great weapons last for 255 seconds. So a whole minute and a half more, basically, the longbeards with great weapons last in that fight. So but their DPS is very low. But that's kind of a trait of dwarf infantry. Even heavy damage dealing infantry has decent melee defense stats. So I wanted to take a look at great swords against the Chaos Warriors, because great swords, a lot of people are saying, they also have said the great swords are actually doing very poorly right now as well. And I've heard that in a number of times, that great swords are just not what they used to be. And I know they're not what they used to be, but I still think they're pretty decent, but I have never really tested them. So I thought, well, let's test these great swords up. They should win this very handily. But let's see if they actually pull value. Do they win, and does it show they're worth 950, or does it show they're worth 850, or do they lose? So we'll take a look at that fight and then go and try and evaluate their value. But great swords with great weapons are exactly what should kill Chaos Warriors. This is precisely the unit that should do very well. So we'll grab them and get them into that fight. And we'll go watch our great swords with great weapons up against the Chaos Warriors. The charge bonuses are gone, and now the great swords should start pulling away. Their stats are not quite as good, but they do have a bonus versus infantry, and now you can see they have the green cross, which means they think they're winning, and you can see by the health they are definitely starting to pull away. They've now got a 1,000 hit point lead on these Chaos Warriors, and they're definitely starting to do quite well. So it looks like the great swords are doing what they're supposed to do, but do they pull value? That's what we're going to take a look. Do they actually win gold in that engagement like they should? So we'll quit that battle and end it. And they only lost 35 units to their 65, so, you know, about half. And we'll go and look at what the data is showing us. And of course they won every fight, and they actually pulled 139 gold, which is exactly what they should do, and their adjusted value in that encounter is 1,089 gold, which is saying that they're worth about 130 more gold than their cost in this engagement. And that's the whole idea. You want to get the right units up against the right units means you're going to pull value, and this is the right unit up against the right unit, and the great swords at 950 act as though they're worth 1,089 only, though, even though you only spent 950 gold when they're up against Chaos Warriors. So it looks like the great swords are okay. Now I wanted to take a look at the Chaos Warriors with great weapons. I think the Chaos Warriors with great weapons are the strongest pound for pound armor piercing infantry in the game right now. And we will take a look at that. So we'll go over here and look at the Chaos Warriors with great weapons. They should beat these regular Chaos Warriors very handily. So we'll go and take a look at how they do in that engagement, and then we'll go take a look at the numbers. How are they actually performing in that engagement? So as far as how much value do they pull, if any? And again, you'd expect the Chaos Warriors with great weapons to clean up the regular Chaos Warriors. These are exactly who they're meant to beat. They cost 100 more gold, but this is precisely the kind of unit they're meant to crush, right? You want to put these scissors up against this paper, right? And that's how most of the game is set up. You want to put the units that are going to do well against units that are going to do poorly against them. So it looks like they're crushing them, which is exactly what they should do. And they're going to win without a whole lot of effort. And it looks like they're going to finish with not quite half health, but they're going to do pretty good. So we'll quit that battle, end the battle. They only had 28 losses to 63 compared to 35 and 65, but we'll look at the total difference when we take a look at the actual data compared to the greatswords. So interestingly enough, the Chaos Warriors with great weapons performed at a value of 1,074 gold. So it looks like they're pulling 225 gold out of that, whereas the greatswords are only pulling out 139. So we could say that the Chaos Warriors with great weapons are basically performing at the same level as the greatswords, the Empire Greatswords, for 100 gold cheaper. So they are really outperforming everyone else here by a lot. Their damage per second, they're doing 43 DPS. The Greatswords are doing 39.6. The Foot Squires 30. The Dwarf Warriors 16, and our Longbeards only 21. It's very, very poor, but we have better defensive stats as the Longbeards. But we're still doing quite poorly in that engagement, and the Chaos Warriors with great weapons are really showing their quality. So I wanted to look at another unit, the White Lions. They're in at about 800 gold. I wanted to look at them against the Chaos Warriors, because a lot of people say the White Lions are trash as well, or they really find that some people don't say they're trash. They find that they underperform. So let's go take a look at how those White Lions actually do perform in an engagement they're meant to do well in. So the White Lions are only 800 gold. They're going to go up against the Chaos Warriors at 750. So we'll put them into that fight. And one of the traits of the High Elves in general is this idea of martial prowess, which until they get to half health, they have a stat bonus, which is actually pretty significant. If you look at this, they get plus 12 melee defense and plus 2 melee attack, so 14 stat points, which is really big. So we'll see. It looks like they're winning right away. They have a good charge bonus, they have decent weapon strength, and they are indeed crushing the Chaos Warriors. This is exactly what they're meant to do. And remember, a lot of people have said the White Lions are actually pretty weak, they don't like them, and they're doing way better than the Longbeards with great weapons. They cost 50 gold more, but this is a crush. The Longbeards with great weapons lose more than they win, and these White Lions are absolutely demolishing the Chaos Warriors very easily. They finished with more than half health. So we'll go and actually see what those numbers turn out to be when we go and look at the spreadsheet. How good did they do? Well, they won every single one. Then they pulled 191 gold. They actually outperformed the greatswords with how much value they pulled out of that. So the greatswords, people are not real high on right now. The White Lions are not really high on right now, but they pulled 191 gold, which is almost as much as the Chaos Warriors with great weapons pulled. So their approximate value is 992 in this engagement. Not nearly as good as the Chaos Warriors with great weapons. Now, when you look at these types of numbers, there's other things that you have to consider. Let's say if every single faction just had a unit called armor piercing, and they all had the exact same stats. Depending on the total lineup of the faction, you could justify making that same unit cost more or less for one faction. Meaning that even though they're exactly the same, it would be more expensive for Faction A to have them over Faction B if Faction A had other things that Faction B did not have. And that's why I think it's reasonable for Chaos, for example, to have very good infantry. There's a lot of things that they don't have, and particularly the Daoi have, I would say, the most in that they don't have magic at all and don't have cavalry at all. Although the Daoi have some very good backline infantry and very good artillery. It's not like the Daoi don't have anything, but this is part of my argument that the Daoi just have to have really good infantry. So it's not only that clearly, I mean, these guys did 42 DPS, almost the same as the Chaos Warriors, but more than the Great Swords. So you could definitely make a good claim that the Great Swords, even though they're doing what they're meant to do, are still underperforming. For sure, you could make that claim reasonably. But all three of these guys are crushing against the Longbeards with great weapons, for sure. So the next test I wanted to do is I just wanted to look at the Saurus Warriors with shields, the Lizardman infantry up against the Chaos Warriors. So the Saurus Warriors are a very unique type of infantry. They're kind of like Forsaken in that they're decently armored, have a lot of weapon strength, have good armor piercing, though they're not an armor piercing unit. Not that I would ever call for nerfs or anything to Saurus Warriors, because the Lizardmen don't have a lot of infantry options as it is, and this is sort of their core infantry, the Saurus Warriors. But I wanted to take a look at, just out of interest's sake, to see how good the Lizardmen Saurus Warriors with shields right here at 800 did against the Chaos Warriors. Now you can see they don't have armor piercing, they aren't anti-infantry, but they have very good weapon strength, and in that they have 18 armor piercing. A lot of times these level of infantry, when they don't have armor piercing, will have like 9 or 10 armor piercing, where these guys have basically double at 18. So they're kind of a unique unit. So I just wanted to see how they stacked up against the Chaos Warriors out of curiosity, because I think they're actually a unique type of unit, and they're very fitting for the Lizardmen. But how would they match up in this? You'd expect they'd do well, because they have pretty good armor piercing. Like Chaos Warriors have 10 armor piercing, right? The Saurus and you can see the Saurus Warriors have 16 extra weapon strength. Though they're low on stats, they have less armor by 40, less melee attack by 8, and less melee defense by 10, and a little less charge bonus. But you can see they're doing quite well. They're winning, and pretty handily at that, I would say, in general. So just out of curiosity, I wanted to understand sort of how this mid-tier infantry was performing, because that's right where Longbeards with great weapons slot in, like that tier 2 armor piercing infantry, that, you know, the mid-tier armor piercing infantry. And that's really, when it comes to multiplayer, your mid-tier infantry is, you know, your infantry between kind of the 700 and 900 tend to be very important, or the most important for most factions, as to how good their infantry feels. If you have good infantry in that 700 to 900 range, your infantry is going to feel pretty good. If you have a lot of weak infantry in there, you're going to feel like all your infantry is crap. So continue. And so we go and take a look at the numbers of the Saurus Warriors versus the Chaos Warriors. They actually won every one, and they pulled 117 value. So, you know, they're technically worth 918, but interestingly, their DPS was 27.4. And remember, our Longbeards with great weapons, their DPS was only 21.2. So an armor-piercing infantry unit's only doing 21 DPS against these Chaos Warriors, and the Saurus Warriors are doing 27. So, man, it's pretty poor, actually, when you start to kind of understand where those numbers are at. Is that our Longbeards with great weapons, which are specifically meant to go up against the Chaos Warriors, are doing worse than the Saurus Warriors. I'm not saying the Saurus Warriors need a nerf or anything. I don't think they do. I think these are perfect right where they are. and they're a good unit, and they're right for the lizardmen and everything else, because they're multi-purpose infantry and they're unique and interesting. So I'm not saying that, but I'm saying this infantry, these Saurus warriors are doing 27 DPS. The Longbeards with great weapons are like 21 or 22, which is really quite poor. No, I wanted to just take a quick look at Bestigor. Bestigor are like the cheapest tier 1 armor piercing infantry. They only cost 1050, and I wanted to see how they would do up against these Chaos Warriors. It should be an absolute demolition. They are among the tier 1 infantry. Like, you look at what you would call tier 1. They're 1050. Tier 1 infantry are Bestigors, Black Orcs, Hammers, Swordmasters of Hoeth, Harganeth Executioners, up to the top tier 1 infantry, Chosen. Like, this is sort of the cheapest tier 1 infantry, is the Bestigors. So how do they do? Are they going to pull 200 gold out of this, kind of like the best of the tier 2 infantry, or are they going to pull less or more, or what is that going to look like? So I wanted to get that fight in. I'm not going to go and test all the tier 1 infantry up against this, because the numbers get skewed as you get further away from the actual value, but they should still pull value. They're worth 1050, but because they're fighting against a unit that is actually, because they're fighting against a unit they should do well against, they should act as though they're worth more gold. So yeah, indeed, they get in. They have good charge bonus. They don't quite have all the stats, but they are absolutely demolishing the Chaos Warriors, which is precisely what they should do. Tier 1 infantry, tier 1 armor piercing infantry against a heavily armored infantry with no armor piercing. This is precisely what you would expect. And when we'll quit the battle. And when we go look at the data, of course they win everyone. You would expect nothing else, but we'll take a look at what that actually comes out to. So you can see they actually pulled 251 gold out of the value. So the highest yet, their DPS is 59.6, so they're way higher than the Chaos Warriors with great weapons or anything like that, because Bestigor truly are tier 1 infantry, and their approximate value in this is 1302. So this is a very good engagement for them. It's exactly what you would expect, armor piercing infantry going up against a heavily armored low armor piercing infantry. These are exactly who the Bestigors are meant to beat up. So that was sort of my baseline of tests before I get into anything. I just wanted to also look at Dwarf Warriors with great weapons versus Dwarf Warriors. Wanted to see where those Dwarf Warriors actually slot in. And if we go and grab our Dwarfs on this side, I'm just going to put in some Dwarf Warriors at 450. And we'll grab some regular Dwarfs here, and we'll put the Dwarf Warriors with great weapons at 500. So these are 450. These are 500. The Dwarf Warriors with great weapons should absolutely demolish the Dwarf Warriors, or at least beat them pretty handily, right? Because they are more expensive. They're armor piercing. These regular Dwarf Warriors, same armor but no armor piercing. So this is where we should see these Dwarf Warriors with great weapons should perform extremely well in this fight. And it's going to take a long time, and their low tier infantry does take long. So it looks like they are winning. Looks like they're winning pretty handily. And since I've done all the testing, I know this takes a really long time to resolve. We're probably going to get down to 53 minutes or 54 minutes. I got it in double fast forward. You can't go a whole lot faster, actually, unfortunately. And these guys are going to start to get tired, and really once they get exhausted, this sort of turns around. And this is one of the things that the Dawi are vulnerable to. You can see now it's become, kind of, they think they're winning, and then they think they're even, they think they're losing. I don't know exactly how this goes. They are very tired, and when they get exhausted, generally it becomes, this gets more even. We're down to 56 minutes. We probably have 2 more minutes for this to go through. Now they think the fight is even. They still think they're winning. Now they think the fight is even. It's kind of flickering, and they must be exhausted now. Yep. So it'll just keep flickering back and forth, and these guys there you go, and there you see they start to think they're winning, the regular dwarf warriors. So there's a bit of an exchange now. They lost a lot up front, so it's hard to say if they can come back, but you can see, I mean, this is down to 53 minutes. It might get down to 53 on the nose. It's going to be quite close. And I did 7, and this is why you do 7 tests, but you can see this is incredibly close, and this is absolutely not what it should be. I mean, they only had 800 health left. These guys had 400, so it's actually doesn't really bode well for our dwarf warriors with great weapons, because they should quite handily beat the dwarf warriors. But we're going to go take a look at the test. Now, I did 7 tests, and in those 7 tests, I actually lost all of them. But they're all incredibly close. So the dwarf warriors with great weapons, you actually witnessed a big outlier. Well, not a big outlier. They were all close. So the dwarf warriors lost all of them to the dwarf warriors with great weapons lost all of those battles to a cheaper unit of dwarf warriors. So this is telling me that the longbeards with great weapons, the dwarf warriors with great weapons, and the foot squires, who I don't care so much about because they're not Dowie, but I really would like to see that rock, scissor, paper effect work for everybody. I mean, if you have foot squires with great weapons and you expect them to do well against heavily armored infantry, they should do well. And clearly they're not. And our dwarf warriors with great weapons in this battle, they lost all 7. You know, we did see a victory in there, but, you know, clearly I did 7 fights and they lost them all. And they lost 83 gold in value, which is actually pretty poor. But you can see all these fights were pretty close, and some of them were like they had 582 health left, and these guys had 798, 492, and 622. So these 3 easily could have been victories. Maybe they could win up to 20%, but it looks like the dwarf warriors are going to beat the dwarf warriors with great weapons. So that is actually pretty poor. And you know, that's telling us our longbeards with great weapons are minors, and our dwarf warriors with great weapons are basically our tier 2 and tier 3 armor piercing infantry for the Dowie are really poor right now. So I wanted to send the longbeards with great weapons up against the foot squires. We know these both performed quite poorly against the chaos warriors. How do they perform up against each other? I was just kind of curious as to how that would look. Just for, again, a bit of context. So let's send these guys at 750 up against the foot squires at 700. Again, just zeroing in on the level of trouble they're in, the level of how bad things really are, so we can understand it. So I just wanted to also look at the foot squires. Now, according to the data, the longbeards with great weapons should win this because they have a little bit more value against the chaos warriors with great weapons. But it should be close. You know, and it should be close anyways. Even if their stats were all up, you'd expect the foot squires at 700 to have close fights with the longbeards with great weapons at 750. So it looks like in this, our longbeards are winning, but it's very close. I mean, their health is close. It looks like the foot squires are catching up, and now they think they're winning. You know, close fight. Are the foot squires going to pull it out in the 4th quarter? Looks like they have enough health, and they think they're winning to actually finish off the longbeards with great weapons. So we, again, are run 7 battles to get a good data set, because you will get outliers from here and there, and it's important to understand where that data sort of lines up. So the foot squires beat the longbeards in this test. How did they do when we did it 7 times? That is the question. So we'll go here. And the longbeards with great weapons only won 2 of the 7. So they only won basically 29% of the time. And this would say the longbeards with great weapons are only worth 687 against the foot squires. Like, this is not a perfect way to do it, but this is giving us some idea of how these 2 units match up over 7 fights. So, you know, our longbeards with great weapons are looking pretty bad. And what do we need to do to improve them? How many stats do they need? Where do they need to be improved? So what I did was I wanted to start comparing them against Chaos Warriors with great weapons to get a baseline. And you know, I thought, well, first thing is I'm going to do is I'm not going up against Chaos Warriors. The Chaos Warriors with great weapons are sort of the benchmark. They are what I'm saying is the best pound for pound infantry in the game. So if I take Longbeards and I chevron them up to 9, they're worth 1055, and I got a bunch of extra stat points. Will they be able to beat the Chaos Warriors with great weapons? You know, they cost 200 gold more. Let's take a look at that. Just real quick for interest's sake, so you can so I can show you how I sort of dialed into where I thought the stat points should be. And can they pull value? So they have a lot more stats. I mean, if they're chevroned up to 1055, 9 stats, they should win pretty easy. You can see though that they're losing right off the get-go. The Chaos Warriors with great weapons are winning off the get. That's because they have a really good charge bonus. You know, really the stat points should start helping the Longbeards with the great weapons pull ahead, and now they're pulling up to about even. You can see I'm looking at the health differential. It's kind of right here when you're watching, so you can see now the Longbeards are truly starting to pull ahead. Their arrows are green, and they're winning. Though they cost 200 gold more, 1055, 9 chevrons, and they're winning, but not by a lot. But you know, they're winning, so they beat them, so that's good. Okay, so we'll quit that battle, end the battle. And you can see that when we look at the data, even at 9 chevrons, they win every one, but you can see they still lose value, which is saying these Chaos Warriors are still pulling value on the Longbeards with great weapons. So I wanted to understand really what are they worth with those plus 6 melee attack, plus 13 melee defense. Now they do have more leadership and more vigor, so this is not the perfect way to hone in on these stats, but it's going to give us some sort of idea. So I just mirrored this down to get, okay, now if they cost 1008 in this fight instead of 1055, the gold differential would be 0, the approximate correct value would be 1008. So what I did, so I'm going to take a quick interlude. I'm glad I wrote this down because this is something that's important to note and understand is unit health. One of the nerfs that the Longbeards took in the last bit of nerfs is they had their hit points lowered for their whole unit from 6600 to 6450, and health may not seem like a lot, but there's some really funny effects that can happen on the edges when you have units going up against units and you have health. And I wanted to try and explain this, how a very small change can make a very big difference in some cases, not all. So, and then I'll go on to the next set of testing real quick. I just wanted to put this in there because it's important to know and understand if you're really into stats and you're really into understanding why some units do better than you think they should, and then against other units where they don't. Well, here's kind of a strange effect which can be a really big deal. So if you do 20 damage per hit, let's say the Chaos Warriors will do 20 damage per hit to these Longbeards with great weapons. You know, that's what, every time they hit them, they're going to do 20 damage. If those Longbeards with great weapons have an average of 61 hit points, it will take an average of 4 successful hits to kill 1 unit. But if you take their hit points down by 2 and their average is 59 hit points, it will take an average of 3 successful hits to kill 1 unit. So even though the health has gone down by a small amount, you know, we're talking 4%, the amount of kills you are getting can go up by as much as 25%. And this is where you get these little edge problems. And actually this is a fun thing to do. I used to search for this stuff all the time because it was fun, and you can find units that match up really well against units you wouldn't think they should because of this effect. Now, so it's important to understand health matters, stats matter, but also health matters because you divide each unit has something like 60 health or 50 health or 80 health or something like that. You basically multiply or divide the health by the total number of units, and I think there's what, 75 units, so you would divide 75 by 6450. So if we did that, just out of curiosity, 6450 divided by 75. So each Longbeard has 86 health. So they used to have like 88 or something like that. So just something for curiosity's sake. Now I'm not going to show. I have 2 more sets of data. There's no sense in showing. I just want to show you what I did to get to where the numbers, that I got to, so I can just show some sort of what my thinking is. So what I did was I actually gave the Longbeards 4 chevrons, so that's +3 melee attack, +6 melee defense, and they actually cost 880, but I ran the battles assuming they only cost 750. So what if they just had 9 stat points? Would they start to pull value? Now in this case they actually won 1 out of 7, so there's kind of a lot of randomness. So they all still lost quite a bit of value, 98, and this is saying they're worth 652 instead of 750. They're still not worth that much against the Chaos Warriors with great weapons. So I did another battery of testing at 6 chevrons, which I thought would be a lot closer. So they cost 943, but what if they had an extra 13 stat points? Remember, they do have extra vigor and leadership, so if you added these stat points to them without the vigor and leadership, they wouldn't do quite as good as they do in this fight. But if they had 13 extra stat points and still cost 750 gold, how would they do up against the Chaos Warriors? Well, they didn't win any. Well, you can see with 4 chevrons they won 1. They would win some, but they're actually now worth 744 gold. They lost them all, but their net value was only 6 gold difference. So 13 stat points would bring them up to, where they're trading reasonably against the Chaos Warriors with great weapons. They're not just getting absolutely demolished. And then I wanted to go back and use the Longbeards with great weapons with 6 chevrons with 13 extra stat points, and I do believe I wanted to put them up against the Chaos Warriors. And this is exactly what we should have seen the first time around. The Chaos Warriors at 750, they beat them every time like they should. They finish with 40% of their health. They do 26 DPS, which still isn't fantastic. It still takes a long time for that battle to resolve, but they're tankier. And they pull 198 gold, so their value is about 950 in this encounter. So I would say 13 extra stat points sort of gets you there. And they're pulling 198 gold, 26 DPS. That's, more in line with these Saurus Warriors at 27 DPS. The White Lions at 42, but they only pull 191 gold. The Chaos Warriors great weapons pull 224. Great swords are only pulling 139, so you can say that they're objectively not doing that great, although they're still doing what they're meant to do. And I don't know precisely what to do with the Dwarf Warriors with great weapons. I didn't go through and do that, but basically we'll just go back over here, and to say that if we were at 6 chevrons and we had those extra stat points and not the leadership, that's 13 extra stat points. You're probably in and around the right place. Now maybe it might be better to look at giving them more charge bonus. These guys have charge bonus of 26 or something like that. But I'd say the Longbeards with great weapons really need more melee attack stats. And you could even just do melee attack and melee defense and make them a tanky type of infantry. But we're really looking at 13 stat points-ish that they need in their melee attack and melee defense to sort of get up to that level of Chaos Warriors with great weapons. Now you could argue that Chaos Warriors with great weapons are overpowered, and I would have a hard time agreeing with that, because Chaos needs good infantry. They're a core part of their gameplay, and they should have good infantry. Chosen should be amazing. Chaos Warriors with great weapons and Chaos Warriors should be really solid type of infantry. Should they be that good? Well, I don't know. You could look at, losing 2 stat points, bringing their melee attack to 34 or even 35 and toning them down a touch. You could look at bringing up the great swords, maybe a couple melee attack stat points type of thing. You definitely this would definitely tell me that foot squires really need a buff on melee attack stats because they don't do the job they're intended to do, although they beat longbeards with great weapons, which is infuriating. You know, Bretonia, they need to have a reasonable... They don't need to have it. They have really good cavalry, and they have top tier magic. You know, they really have some decent flyers. They don't have good range. They don't have real good artillery. You know, but I think the foot squires definitely need to be better. They are way underperforming, and some new player comes along and thinks, hey, I got an armor piercing infantry, I'm going to take them for my armor piercing, and they just don't do the job they're intended to do, and they lose games, and they don't know why. Because the intuitive nature of rock, scissors, papers tells me if I take armor piercing infantry and I put it up against non-armor piercing infantry that's heavily armored, they should do good. And in this case, they don't. And that is the case with longbeards with great weapons. It is also the case with dwarf warriors with great weapons. We'll go and take a look at the longbeards with great weapons. It's the case with dwarf warriors with great weapons, and the case with miners. So, you know, I had said I thought we needed to reduce the price of miners and give them the tabletop ability. But miners, you know, if they had 28 melee attack, you know, they'd probably be worth 325 maybe. Still wouldn't be, you know, if you looked at my testing, I don't know, it'd be close. Dwarf warriors with great weapons, if they had 30 melee attack, you know, maybe they're starting to get into the level they are. Maybe it's 28 melee attack, 6 extra melee attack, maybe starts to put them in the range. Longbeards with great weapons, you were saying 13 stat points, you know, if they had 42 melee attack, I don't know. I would rather still, like, I like the feel of dwarf infantry where they have these armor piercing infantry. I'd rather them have like maybe 26 melee attack and 34 melee defense, you know, 36 or, you know, 34 melee attack and 44 melee defense. I do like that. That gives dwarf heavy armor piercing infantry a feel they can hold for a long time. And but, you know, I would definitely like to see miners to be all attack and no defense. You know, miners know where to put their pick. They can aim it quite well, but I wouldn't expect them to be good in defense, so their melee attack should be quite good. So there it is, your longbeards with great weapons, your miners, and your dwarf warriors, your tier 2 and tier 3, and I guess your tier 4. They're a one of a kind a miner is, but tier 2 and tier 3 Dowie armor piercing infantry are really underperforming. You know, doesn't mean you can't take them, doesn't mean you can't make a competitive build with them in, depending on what you're using them with, but even against units they're meant to do well against, they're not doing that well. So what is the answer in terms of competitive play? I mean, if you really wanted to think, if you needed armor piercing, an armor piercing solution, really your solutions start and end with the hammers right now. You know, if you wanted good armor piercing, you have a backline of hammers. Grumbling Guard are still pretty decent, and hammers have 3 armor piercing units, and then you look at something for your back line. You could also look at, when it comes to facing off against other armor piercing units, you know, they don't have shields. The dwarfs have plenty of options for armor piercing in that they have the Thunders, they have Rangers with great weapons, the Uthar's Raiders, they even have the Skolder Guard. Really, there are options with the Bolt Thrower is actually quite good because it has armor piercing. Even though it's anti-large, it's good at dealing with infantry. The Grudge Thrower Cannon, Goblobber, Organ Gun, Flame Cannon are all good against armored infantry, and all possibilities. What I would say what my conclusion would be based on this testing is that the dwarf warriors with great weapons, the miners, not the miners with blasting charges, and the longbeards with great weapons really are underperforming pretty significantly right now. That's the testing, I think, that is pretty definitive. You know, you can argue with precisely how the testing looks, but it's pretty clear when you compare them to other armor piercing infantry that they're underperforming, and it is showing that the great swords, you know, they're doing their job, but they're not performing like the Chaos Warriors. They're underperforming compared to the Chaos Warriors. They're underperforming compared to White Lions. And White Lions are a unit that gets a lot of flack because they always seem to quote-unquote underperform. But really what happens is the High Elves as a whole kind of fade in the fourth quarter. You know, they come out real strong, but as soon as they get below half health, they really fade because of their faction mechanic with the martial prowess and martial mastery. And you can see people use that. You know, it actually exacerbates a mechanic that is really effective anyway, which is focus fire. You'll see people will focus fire till they get the unit to half health, and unlike other factions where, you know, you want to focus fire until you get a unit routing, you don't need to do that with the High Elves. You just need to focus fire until you get a unit to half health, and then you can move on to focus firing another unit. So they're prone to really good play. So you can see a lot of people aren't really high on them in competitive play because other really good players know this, are very good at exploiting that faction mechanic to good effect. And the White Lions generally don't seem to perform. But in our testing, they're not bad. They're performing actually quite well, doing what they're meant to do, killing heavily armored infantry that has no armor piercing, and they would do good, just fine against Longbeards. They do just fine against Dwarf Warriors. You know, that's who they're meant to kill. They do really good against Chaos Warriors, so White Lions would do pretty good in there. But our Longbeards with great weapons, they are definitely not performing. And from what I'm seeing, if they had 6 chevrons, if they had that many more stat points, and they were still costing 750, they would be about right. Maybe 5 chevrons. You can argue where that is, but you know, in comparative testing with the Chaos Warriors with great weapons and the regular Chaos Warriors, this is about where they would need to be in stat points just to be competitive, and they would be competitive at 750 with this stat line. So that's the testing. You know, our Dwarf Warriors, our Miners, and our Longbeards are all badly underperforming for armor-piercing infantry. I know the Hammers are still very good. They are quite good. They do very, very well. And the Grumbling Guard are right about worth 1,000, maybe a little bit more, depending on how well you use them or how hard they're focused. So Grumbling Guard are still a pretty decent unit. They used to be outrageous, like when they had the extra health and the extra stat points, and the extra, you know, before they nerfed their Viga aura from 18% to 9%, a Grumbling Guard were outrageous. Now they're just a really good unit who can be quite strong in some situations. But the Hammers are definitely still good. I mean, Ironbreakers are good. You know, Longbeards, regular Longbirds are still very strong. Warriors of Dragonfire Pass are situational. Dwarf Warriors, regular Dwarf Warriors are still decent. They're situational. They're good for chaff infantry. And your Miners with blasting charges are decent. You know, Slayers are good. Dragonback Slayers are awesome. Nurglewing's Ironbreakers are awesome. The Peak Gate Guard can be amazing if they're not focused down. So it's not like the Dowie are hurting real bad for options, because you can make up these 3 units underperforming. But really, if you're a new player and you don't understand anything about the game and you want to pick up these units and you just lose because you've picked units that are underperforming, I think that's unfair to new players specifically, especially anyone who wants to pick up multiplayer. And you know, they should be at least able to rely on the concept of that rock paper scissors mechanic. And when you have units that perform like this, you can't rely on it at all, which is really, really unfortunate. So that's the set of testing. Hope you found it interesting. I would love to hear comments. I mean, I love comments all the time. I know I always say that, but I mean, people leave great comments and they're interesting and, you know, thoughtful. You know, sometimes they're funny, sometimes I just laugh, and sometimes they make me think. Sometimes they spur extra testing, and it was a comment that spurred this round of testing. So thank you, and I want to hear those comments and want to have that discussion as to what you think about these units, because you know, and where they fit in. Are you surprised that the Longbeards with great weapons are performing so poorly, or you know, are you surprised like I was surprised that the White Lions of Trace are actually not that bad? But you know, a lot of competitive players don't like using them because other competitive players can take advantage of the faction mechanic. And if there's no doubt, the Chaos Warriors with great weapons right now are the pound for pound king of armor-piercing infantry. I know Chosen with great weapons are much better, but they're 1,400 gold. These guys are 850 gold, and they will pull value against other armor-piercing units. They will pull value against anything that's heavily armored. They're just an outstanding unit. And I think the Longbeards with great weapons, the Dwarf Warriors with great weapons, and the Miners, these Miners are actually very unique, and they're so bad. They're so poor up against other low-tier infantry that they're not even worth bringing. That's how bad they are. But you bring these 3 units up, fills out the roster a little more, makes the Dowie more intuitive for new players, and it will make it more fun for me and more fun for all my Dowie kin out there. So, yep, give me some comments. Love to hear what your thoughts are. Some more testing you'd like to see or understand for sure. I got to get out my Beastmen testing. Like, really, it is Chaos, Beastmen, and Dark Elves, which are the bane of the Dowie right now. And those are the 3 factions I need to focus on for my Essential Units series. And I have done a lot of testing. Soulhammer's helped me out, and I have a lot of testing in the can. It's hard to find time to get everything together. I have so much I want to do, but that doesn't mean I don't want to hear other suggestions for testing or things that you guys think, or testing that you've done. I'd love to hear interesting unit combinations that you found that can, we don't have Longbeards with great weapons. We can't use them at 750. Is there a unit combination that can do very well against armor-piercing infantry? You can see against Janet. I tried using, what I tried doing was Dwarf Warriors combined with Rangers with great weapons. It didn't work, but that, you try it anyways, right? And you find out, well, it didn't work, but had it worked really well, that would have been great. But so, maybe it's Thunders in front of your Dwarf Warriors and then bring them back. But we know Thunders have a bug right now where they run into combat. You saw that in my Skaven game against Janet, if you watched that. And where these freaking Thunders just ran into combat and got murdered, and but they'll fix that bug and Thunders will be back to where they should be. Maybe it's some other thing that you can see as being really, really good. I have done this before. Put Dwarf Warriors with Bolt Throwers, and I think I have a Dark Elf matchup where I had 5 Bolt Throwers, and they were basically matched up with Dwarf Warriors. So Dwarf Warriors were there to hold the line. The Bolt Throwers were there to take out their armored infantry. They weren't there to take out Cav or anything like that. They were there to take out Harganeth Executioners against the Dark Elves, and they actually did quite well. And they did like what they were supposed to do. That's 1,000 gold tied up, and they performed quite well. I'd like to see something, or I'd like to hear some things you guys have tried, or combinations you think might be effective or worth testing or understanding. Always love hearing from you. Look forward to the comments below. Hope you found it real interesting, and I will see you soon.